day, South Africa. Public Finance Management Act No. 1 of 1999's Chapter 4, Section 27, Subsection 3G demands our governmental executives to serve the population accordingly in that, quote, an annual budget must be in accordance with a format as may be prescribed and must at least contain, G, proposals for financing any anticipated deficit for that financial year, unquote. Towards the end of July this year, a crucial agreement was reached between a majority of South Africa's trade unions and our government on the public servants' wage bill, which entailed a 1.5% salary increase, including a cash allowance of between 1,220 and 1,695 rand. This increase has been tallied into Treasury's allocations for the next 3 years, while the cash allowance, which will cost around 18 billion rands, hasn't yet been considered, as it is a year-long agreement which will have to be added to the 2021-22 fiscal year's 650.4 billion rands public sector compensation bill. Finance Minister Godongwana's midterm budget policy statement, or the MTBPS, on the 11th of this month also didn't comprehensively cover the public sector wage bill, which will prove to be another failure for public sector workers such as the Gauteng nurse candidates in 2018 who had their study process suspended while the country was facing a nurse shortage, with this department having had the largest budget adjustment of 1.23 billion rands. Apart from reflecting on the tax collections of the current financial year, Minister Godongwana hasn't adjusted any of the levies as a form of remedial action considering the rising national debt the country is facing. His admission that national revenue, quote, can be increased with a more effective and efficient revenue collection authority, unquote, is spot on, as we're currently accumulating up to 500 million rands of debt per load shedding stage due to the mismanagement at Eskom. Our tax collection revenue figures are worsening each day, and we should recall that 9 years ago, our Gini coefficient figures were devastating in that only 8% of individual taxpayers were paying 50% of the personal income tax, or PIT, revenue, while 1% of companies were paying 60% of the corporate income tax, or the CIT. South Africa's retirement fund provisions continue to being in a terrible state, and the only innovation that the new finance minister could muster was a, quote, limited withdrawals, unquote, initiative, which is dependent on affordability, quote, and liquidity of funds, unquote. This stagnation is clearly inherited from the previous finance minister, Godongwana, who during his last budget speech on the 24th of February this year admitted that, quote, we owe a lot of people a lot of money. These include pension funds, the Public Investment Corporation, and ordinary South African bondholders, unquote. As per the United Nations, or the UN's Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's OECD 2019 report on pensions, South Africa is rated last out of 44 countries surveyed in this report, as it shows how South African citizens receive 17% of their average monthly income before tax that they earned while they were working, compared to 83% for India, 60% for France, and the 49% average for the developed world. The year 2017's 30.4 billion rands revenue shortfall at the South African Revenue Services, or SARS, due to malpractices in the payroll department and other unscrupulous transactions, is one of the reasons that the South African public isn't trusting our finance department to mitigate the rising national debt. Judging from the pension funds abusing by the previous ministers, such as Malusi Gigaba's 2017 South African Airways, or SAA's 6.9 billion rands bailout, including the acting CEO of the Public Investment Corporation, or the PIC's, Vuyani Hako's indifference to Eskom's rolling blackouts, this is another department which is beyond a state of recovery. Dr. Dion George, Member of Parliament and DA Shadow Deputy Minister of Finance, is proposing an alternative MTBPS. Tourism Act No. 3 of 2014's Chapter 3, Section 10, Subsection 1C2, explains the South African Tourism Board together with the Ministry's fiduciary duties by stating that, quote, 1. The functions of the board are to c. develop and implement a marketing strategy for tourism that promotes to the national tourism sector strategy, unquote. 2 weeks ago, South African Tourism Board's performance report to the Portfolio Committee on Tourism seems to have displayed an accurate picture of South Africa's current tourism situation, as it was revealed that the board's books weren't reflecting a good outlook. A qualified audit is an apt indication of the terrible condition our country's foreign relations are in, and it looks like there aren't sufficient efforts being directed towards getting our economy out of the sub-investment grades which all the credit rating agencies have us under. Compared to 2017 statistics, which indicated approximately 3.5 million travelers passing through our borders on the month of August, this year's numbers have decreased to a measly 1 million. The latest developments, which have been touted as a great success by the Tourism Department Minister Lindiwe Sisulu pertaining to the United Kingdom's or the UK's decision to remove South Africa from the red list of countries forbidden from British travellers visiting without requiring hotel quarantining once returning, seems to have been celebrated too soon. Last week Friday saw England place us back on the travel red list as a result of the newly detected Omicron COVID-19 variant. Israel and the US have followed the UK's lead, and the list of countries is growing. Our unbanning would have spelled greater prospects for our tourism industry's recovery. Alas, a region like Gauteng has only 29% of its adult population fully vaccinated thus far, and still has to mitigate the effects that the Delta COVID-19 variant is yet to have on our country in the future. An absolutely disastrous state is ensuing in our tourism sector, as its productivity is stunted by over 3/4, and the most damage is felt by the dealings we have with the greatest investors into austerity's trade. We cannot afford to squander our relations with the UK, who have, within the past 2 decades, been the number one recipients of our exports, including being our third largest source of our imports. Germany is another nation whose contribution is crucial to our sovereign success, as South Africa has had relations with them since 1941, and the trade relationship between the two lands has been worth in excess of 12.6 billion euros over the past decade, and this explains why they make up 12% of the total annual visitors into South Africa. Out of the Latin denomination of countries that South Africa is in relations with is France and Italy, who are in the top 10 countries with the highest influx of tourists into our shores, with the former having been South Africa's 9th largest importer and the latter having been trading with South Africa since the 1870 Mineral Revolution. Since 1918, Brazil has had a consulate in Cape Town and has since gotten into multiple bilateral treaty agreements with South Africa, ranging from an agreement in mutual assistance between its customs administrations, cooperation in higher education, avoiding double taxation, and prevention of tax evasion in relation to income tax, and preferential trade between Mercosur and the Southern African Customs Union, or the SACU. Manny de Vries, Member of Parliament and the DA Shadow Minister of Tourism, is explaining the repercussions of our cabinet not pitching up to the negotiation table on the grounds of the existing curfews and state of disaster. Thank you.